Hello, everybody. We are live. Welcome and thanks for tuning in today. Sorry for a little bit of a late start. We had some unknown technical gremlins that snuck into our audio setup, but we got them mostly figured out, so we're up and running. I'm here today with Christian Henson. Christian, you want to say hi? We are here to have a uncensored spotlight, moderately uncensored, I guess. We talked about that a bit. We'll see. We'll see what comes up. But a spotlight for Christian Henson. We're gonna do a deep dive into everything that brought him to where he is now, his history, his background, what he's up to these days. Also, Crowhill, Spitfire Audio, pretty much anything relevant and interesting. And also, feel free to ask questions and bring up comments in the chat too. If you want to ask. Oh, there's no audio, Simon said. Oh, from Christian, there's no audio. Okay, hang on one sec. Let's check that. Christian, can you say hello real quick? Okay, yep, hang on. Let's just do one moment, everybody. Sorry about this. We've got a hiccup again. Okay, his audio. Yep, let's restart capture. Okay, I'm going to flip real quick back to our little other screen here, and we'll be back in a jiffy. This.
1 2 1 2 1 2.
Oh, there you are. I think you're back up now. Okay, and I think we are back up because now I see your signal. Hopefully that's good. Simon, let me know if it is. Yeah, I see his signal now. Great. Awesome. Okay, very good. Thank you. Sorry, guys. It's been a busy day. But anyway, yeah, so if you're active in the chat and you're asking questions, we are also going to be raffling off some licenses for the new Crowhill product, VENOM, and also the UJAM Blockbuster bundle. It includes a bunch of different titles. So all you have to do is be a participant in this stream, ask questions or show your support or anything, and then we'll do a random raffle. But yeah, Christian, before we start, do you want to anything you want to say today, or to get your level? You want to do a check-in or anything, or we could to dive right in?
No, hi. Well, it's Christian speaking from Edinburgh in Scotland. It's great to be invited on this. Thanks very much for having me. And ask away. I tend to. I just have to warn you. I'm not a natural public speaker, so when I get nervous, I tend to curse a little bit. So apologies in advance for that.
Very good. Yeah, I was wondering about the whole theme of uncensorship because I've been reading our script and the interview with you and the blog article, and it's a theme that I've been noticing. And I'm actually also learning a lot about you in this week. So this is a thing, I guess, that I'm going to learn more about, maybe the uncensored nature of things. But yeah, let's start. Let's go way back because I've heard in our article we mentioned, like, you at very young ages making decisions to buy samplers instead of cars and that kind of thing. So I'm just curious, what was the very first thing that got you musically inclined? Were you starting to play an instrument? What was the very first thing that ever set you on the path that you're on?
Well, apparently it was when I was about 3 years old. My grandfather put a pair of headphones on me, um, and was playing Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, and apparently just all the blood drained from my face, and I'd looked like I'd seen a ghost. My mum always used to just talk about this fact that the music seemed to have some kind of massive impact on me. So I decided that I wanted to play the piano from like maybe 4 years old. And I've always been a total half pint, so very small. So I had to wait. In those days, they didn't put you on an instrument until your hands were big enough or until you could reach the pedals. So I had to wait till I was 5 years old. But, I have to say, and as a parent now, I'm so thankful to my parents for buying me an old piano. And once I decided to go ahead with this, probably because they bought me this piano, they were very good in supporting me. They didn't push me to practice, so there wasn't that kind of unpleasantness about it. It wasn't a chore, but they also never let me give up. And I always hate it when parents prove to be right, but they said, you will thank us one day. So here I am. And so, yeah, I started playing piano, and it was quite clear from an early age that for some reason I just couldn't get my head around reading music. I've since learned that I've got ADHD. And I tested myself the other day. I just pointed at a line on the bass clef and I said, what note is that? And I had to actually figure it out, which is just insane. I've been looking at these 10 lines since, for nearly 50 years, and I still can't figure it out. And, actually one of the interesting things about moving to Scotland is you discover that there's this heritage of musicianship up here that is incredible. And in fact, many musicians don't read music. It's just not the way they learn. They learn through ear, and that's the way I did. So as a consequence, there was always this kind of thread running through my musical history of it being somewhat busked, somewhat self-taught. And then just the kind of the computers being in people's homes interested me. And suddenly there came this opportunity to combine these two interests of computers and the piano, and that I think really caught my attention. That the fact that I didn't need to necessarily be a concert pianist, but I could still make really big, gnarly sounds on a keyboard. And again, because of the support of my parents and my persuasiveness, I was bought a Casio CZ1000 when I was 14. And when I was 6, I did a film. I was a child actor for one film where Petula Clark played my mother. And there was some money that I wasn't allowed to touch till I was 16. And a friend of my father's, who is a composer who famously did the score for Witchfinder General, he had this sampler that he didn't want anymore. So I used that money to buy it off him. And I think it was only myself and Ferris Bueller who were in possession of a sampler at that age.
That's really cool. Yeah. So something about that, like, accessibility of like something new is happening in music in this digital era, that anyone can crack it open and do crazy things in any environment almost. That's something that really drew you in. And I think that's something I want to also get to today eventually, is like the segue of your career into, co-founding Spitfire and becoming, a pioneer in making these instruments available to other artists, like in the same way that you were inspired by. So we'll get there later, because I kind of want to go just chronologically, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, so we started. Okay, people are asking if we can make everything a little louder overall. I will raise my own volume up here. I'm raising myself, and we're going to have to raise Christian here. Christian, if you could just say something real quick, I'm going to boost you.
Hello, 1 2 1 2. And if you need us to boost anything this end, let us know.
Sure. Okay, I just raised it generously. Hopefully that made a difference. But yeah, so okay. So we went to you bought that sampler, you said, right? Was this the same sampler that was referenced in your interview? I think you had an interview with Daniel at around 16, the age, instead of like doing the traditional thing of like getting a car and just following, normal life steps. You were on your own path a little bit already, right?
Yeah, it was a Kurzweil K250 XP, which was a bloody expensive thing back then. But I got paid fairly well for the film. So my parents are show business. My mother was a dancer originally and became an actress, and my dad was a musician who became an actor. And somewhat, I don't know, cruelly, they would refer to people who weren't in show business as civilians, and their biggest nightmare was to have a child who, it was literally like the polar opposite of Dad, Mum, I want to become a musician. Aghast. It was like, Dad, Mum, I want to become an accountant. They would go, no. So there was always this support that somehow I would go into show business, but also a great enthusiasm that I wouldn't try becoming an actor, which is, by all accounts, still a very difficult and terrible job to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's true. I'm really close to that in industry as well. But it's all of these industries are very hard to crack into for sure.
Yeah. I think that there was always the argument that that if you could just play to a certain ability as a piano, there would always be a band or a wedding band or a cocktail bar that you could play in. The skill was less subjective than being a good actor or not. So they were pleased to see me going into that side, and I saw technology as a way of possibly. Because it was very unusual for kids to have computers. It was totally unusual for a kid to have a sampler in those days, and it just struck me as an interesting way of maybe bypassing the need to learn how to read music. And so I didn't go to music college or anything like that.
Yeah. You don't in that era with those tools. You don't really, especially now, even more than ever. You don't need that anymore, really, that traditional education or that schooling. You can do it, of course, but a lot of people don't do that, and you see that everywhere. And that's something that inspires, I think, a certain type of mindset in making music, which I learned a lot about you as well. There's a lot of this energy of you distancing yourself from the music to maintain your creativity or your workflow. So, and do you still?
The thing that also happened, because I'm 53 now, so it was incredibly unusual to have a home setup in those days, like really unheard of. And but what I was very honored to witness was the birth of hip hop. And I remember the first time, I would have been probably about 13 or 14, the first time I heard a house track. And suddenly this idea of bedroom producers and stuff started emerging. And I was just rightly placed at that time.
Yeah. I mean, so I read a bit of your, you started in more electronic and drum sampling type of environments, like drum and bass. You worked with MC Conrad. And so how did that type of work affect or transition you in any way? So how did those pieces connect? Your scoring work, your orchestral work, and do you still use a lot of, that mindset you used to adopt in those other types of music, those more electronic stuff? In what ways is that still present and helpful to you today?
Well, I think that this will be a thread that we will return to. But basically, I couldn't master reading music. The concert halls in those days were not playing, John Williams concerts or indeed the likes of Hans Zimmer amplifying orchestral music or anything like that. The concert halls were empty because they were playing this godforsaken avant-garde music. Now, I understand its purpose and I understand its historical importance, but it was just music that I didn't want to listen to. So as a consequence, I decided not to go to music college. As a consequence, that was my career over. I always wanted to be a film composer, wanted to combine these two loves of music and this art form that my parents were a part of, television, film. I was always deeply fascinated by film scores and stuff like that. This is years before the internet, so I couldn't. Without going to a library, I wouldn't have discovered that Irving Berlin didn't read music. I wouldn't have discovered that, I don't believe Hans Zimmer really reads music. I think he can follow a score. And he was just emerging at that point. So for me, I became a baker. I went into the restaurant business, much to my parents' chagrin. And it was, I just went to a gig one day and I met this guy who worked in pubs playing cover versions. And in those days, you couldn't buy backing tracks. And because I had this home setup, I could actually create backing tracks for us to play against. The weird licensing laws in this country mean you're only allowed 2 people to play simultaneously in a pub. So I just started making these backing tracks and in a weird way kind of created my own university, a little bit like a car mechanic learns maybe how a car works by just taking it to pieces and putting it back together again. So that's where I honed my programming skills. All of my friends, I grew up in West London, all of my friends went to university. And when they came back, the factory on the hill was the BBC TV centre. And they started working there. And in that interim period, I made friends with people who made porn movies. and started writing music for porn movies. So that's really how those two roads met.
And was that
the intercourse of programming and the need to underscore?
Was that the very first film thing you were doing musically? Was the porn stuff?
Well, it was actually the first film stuff I worked on. There was this very sudden paradigm shift, and it was a combination of David Arnold and a track that he composed with Björk for, I think it was called The Young Americans, and then him venturing into James Bond, and also the work that Massive Attack and Craig Armstrong did with orchestral stuff combined with beats, and then you had William Orbit doing stuff like The Beach. So suddenly composers really needed to do drum programming, and most composers in those days were conservatoire educated. They read, paper and pencil, all of that kind of stuff. So suddenly there was this demand for this new job called the job of being a drum programmer. I was introduced to a composer's agent who introduced me to Anne Dudley, who is a trailblazer unto herself of Art of Noise fame. She just won the Oscar for Full Monty, and I helped her with a film called Pushing Tin, which is a John Cusack film about air traffic controllers, Billy Bob Thornton as well. So that was my first experience of film. Okay. And then during that period, because a friend of mine heard that I was kind of working with Anne Dudley, they said, well, I'm working on these porno films. Don't suppose now that you know how to do that, you can do these.
Very cool. Yeah, very cool. That's awesome. and just while we're on the subject of like this mishmash of influence that started like segueing into different career outlets, you joked, I think it's a direct quote, to kill the Amen break, the Amen break. That's that drum break, right? That's that infamous like. Yeah. So what can you elaborate more on that and how it's maybe overstayed its welcome, or do you actually use it seriously at all? Have you ever, or is this I'm just curious about that quote from you.
Well, no, I was introduced to, I basically, just again, working chronologically, I was very busy working, playing pubs, playing cover versions, getting quite good at the keyboard. We did a lot of like TV theme tunes from the 1970s. We were called Crafty and Crutch. I think I was Crutch. We were playing a lot of Stevie Wonder covers and all of this kind of stuff. But I suddenly got very ill, and I had a brain hemorrhage when I was 25 years old. Ended up having brain surgery, and it gives you just a slightly different perspective on life. And I don't know why, but I just decided that I really wanted to find something that was more than just playing in pubs, because I'd given up on my music career, and I thought the best I was going to get out of life was baking during the day, playing pubs at night. So I decided to partner up with a guy who just had this big tax rebate, and we decided to set up a studio in North London. And it was when all of these project studios exploded, because everyone was like bedroom mixing and all of this kind of stuff. And just out of happenstance, we met these guys called Good Looking Records, which was LTJ Bookham's label. And they just needed a place to record the vocals for their MCs. And I became a bit of an engineer that did basically vocal sessions for people with bad interpersonal skills who couldn't manage MCs. I went to a very, very diverse school, an incredibly rough school in West London. So grew up around people from all different backgrounds and stuff, and just didn't find it difficult to kind of communicate with people from those different kind of different backgrounds, basically. And so found a bit of a niche for myself working with MCs, predominantly for people like LTJ Bookham, but also the Freestylers, Plump DJs, Love Station, Strike, those kind of bands. And then naturally through that, you suddenly go, well, I've been dabbling with a bit of drum and bass, and, made a few B-sides here and there, culminating in something that it doesn't have my name on it. It's a pseudonym, but I actually did 2 remixes from the Grease soundtrack, which still to this day appear on the Grease original cast soundtrack as a flamenco version of Summer Nights and a slightly more breakbeat version of You're the One That I Want. And that, I guess, was the highlight of my dancey career.
Wow, very
and
cool.
I didn't use a break for those.
You didn't use the break?
No.
That's really cool. I didn't know that. I'll have to pull them up and take a listen after this. Yeah. Everyone else should too.
Oh, please don't. They're really pretty awful.
I would like to know, though. It's part of the history. It's part of your story. It's interesting, I think. It's always interesting to hear like the very first things or the very early things from somebody great over time. It's something that I've also learned, you know, like don't always remove your old crappy music because no one will ever see where you came from, you know? I think it's super interesting. But so I'm curious also, this is something I personally don't know much about, is the actual, the birth of Spitfire Audio and what position you were in that made you decide it was time for that. Was there any single thing that happened or people that you met or something that catalyzed the start of Spitfire Audio? Or did you always kind of feel maybe that there was something like that on your horizon where you would help create tools for musicians and artists? And
absolutely not.
Never. You never thought?
No, absolutely not. Never ever thought of going into business, and stated that quite clearly to my co-founder when we came up with the idea. Basically, the situation was I was working on porn. I was doing this drum and bass stuff. I was still doing the odd pub at night. And my friends, bit by bit, slowly started climbing through the ranks at the BBC. And instead of trawling through library albums, they just throw me a few bones here and there. I'm doing this travel slot for this travel program. Can you put some music in there? And eventually that career of doing what's called FACENT or factual entertainment music, that started to gather a bit of pace. And it became very clear that there were a bunch of composers who had these private sample libraries that they were again, because this David Arnold thing and stuff like that there was this kind of breed of composers who weren't necessarily from a conservatoire background, but yet were doing orchestral scores. And what was really annoying about these orchestral samples is, one, they were private, you couldn't get your hands on them, and the ones that were commercially available were very difficult to use, hugely expensive, and they just sounded absolutely massive. Now, the kind of work I was doing was much, much smaller scale TV. And so there was a mismatch. It's a mismatch that is now ignored if you watch, like, I don't know, the Great British, MasterChef, something like that, where the music's absolutely huge and Wagnerian. Yeah. There was a mismatch in aperture between these enormous symphonic samples and the kind of work I was doing. So I just, met up with this guy and I said, there were a couple of things. One, samples sound too big, too difficult to use, too expensive. That's 3 things. But the other thing was, I went to see a film called The Motorcycle Diaries with music composed by a Argentinian composer called Gustavo Santaolalla, and was really taken aback with these shimmering beds of small sounding guitars that almost sounded like they were made of glass. I lived in Soho in central London at that point, close to a folk music instrument shop called Hobgoblin Music. Went in, played them this score, and they went, "Oh, it's a charango." Now, I looked at this thing, and I never worked out how to play guitars, couldn't play them, but my brother was a bass player. So I really, really wanted that sound, but I really also didn't want it to sound like how samples sounded, which in those days, they all sounded perfect and lovely and very realistic, but they didn't have any personality. So I said to my brother, "Can you just play every note wrong? And I'm going to keep all of the mistakes in and all of the squeaks, this, that, and the other." And I remember throwing this thing together on a EXS, the Logic sampler, and it all came together very quickly. And I remember the minute I played it saying, "This is life-changing." And it's the only time I've ever uttered that sentence. We all say it so often in my life, and it actually was. I famously got banned off the Vienna Samples forum for saying, why are these things sampled like this? Why aren't they just recorded like you record real music, with the mistakes, the tuning, this, that, and the other? And they thought I was trolling, so they got rid of me, and it kicked up a bit of a stink. So this guy got in touch with me. We went for a pint at the Endurance pub in Soho, and I said, the last thing I want to do, I'm going to swear, is set up a fucking business. So I'd been working and got to know lots and lots of A-list composers by that point. I said, well, listen, I think what we should do is go into Air Studios, try and record this small band, but see if we can kind of do it wrong, in parentheses, in inverted commas, because there was this kind of strange rule set for making samples that was different from recording real music. So we did that, and again, the minute we put it together into a sampling, it was like different from anything we'd used. And so we set up this private members group of about 15 composers, and that was the first 2 years of Spitfire.
Wow.
And then, and I said, I don't want to set up a business, this, that, and the other. But then this volcano went off in Iceland, and suddenly we couldn't deliver samples because air freight stopped for several months. So we had to kind of work out how to do it digitally, and we just got to the point with internet connections where people could leave something overnight and download a gigabyte and stuff. So it became a possibility. First of all, that was the one thing that led us towards where Spitfire led up, which was the ability to distribute without actually physically having to package these things. And then secondly, we totally miscalculated tax. And basically we were facing bankruptcy. And I'll never forget the day I was in Trafalgar Square. And I just thought it's really interesting how all of these kind of things are private, where I actually find orchestral writing really easy, because it's just like playing a keyboard. Provided you listen to good music, you kind of know what to do. You feel your way around it. So I said to my my co-founder at the time, I said, what would it be like to actually create something that was really, really scaled down in depth and breadth, but gave anyone the opportunity to make orchestra music? And it was that thing that was the touch paper for Spitfire.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting, because I've also, when I happened into my first interactions with Spitfire Audio, like the products, I didn't come from an orchestral or scoring type of environment, but I actually found the instruments in that context of, I do need these raw, usable products that are not so overly polished, that I could just conduct on my own, that aren't super expensive, that kind of thing. So I did find that exactly in that's kind of the bucket you created, was like, these are tools for the people who just need them. They don't need this whole overly polished suit and tie type of crazy composition. Because that almost is limiting in a way to creating.
Yeah, and there was this slightly kit car approach to the way samples were being made, that you could make them sound amazing, but you would really have to work them hard. And I just suggested that we make them so literally when you press a keyboard, it sounds like a Hollywood score. And I still use that library to this day, and I think that 15 million people have downloaded it.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
There is an interesting question. I'm actually curious. I'm not sure. Someone in the chat is asking generally about design theory, UX, UI, and like actual prototyping of like the vision of a product. And I'd be curious to know how much of that resonates with you. Are you passionate about that part of the process? Do you get involved regularly? And in what ways? That's something I would love to learn about your workflow and with the products you're on these days. Yeah.
Well, so my mother brought me up as an aesthete, and my granddad, the reason it was called Spitfire is because he patched Spitfires and converted planes, passenger planes into Dakotas and then back again at the end of the Second World War. and that's what led to Spitfire being called that in his honor. But he gave me a fascination in industrial design that I've always been really passionate about. And we went into this space, Spitfire, and it was like imagine making jams in your garden shed to sell at the local school fair. It was just two of us. So I just was marginally better or had a better eye than my co-founder, Paul Thompson. And so I was just, well, you do the artwork. And what I immediately experienced by looking at the other sample companies that were around at that point, of which there are only 3 or 4, was how tremendously awful their aesthetic was, and somewhat boyish, exclusionary. So I went down this route of sketching up an idea for the GUI design, which I think was pretty much the foundation of the GUI design for all of our GUIs up until we started working with Hans Zimmer. And it was the idea of anti-skew morph. It was more of a functional, very intuitive interface. So yeah, it's something I feel absolutely passionately about. And with this new enterprise, Crowhill, I do all of the design work, all of the GUI design.
Nice.
Well, when we go into this new phase, it's going to be stuff that I have penned myself.
That's very cool. I didn't know that. Yeah, so that's the perfect segue also. I was going to ask, so we've touched on the history of Spitfire. So Crowhill definitely has a different vibe to it. It's more of boutique and bespoke, and it's kind of, like for example, I think the Vaults experience as a user is a very good like symbol of what you're trying to do with Crowhill. And I'd like to know more about what the vision is with Crowhill specifically. I think most people can sense and assume what it might be in comparison to Spitfire, but I'd love to hear it from you. How do you think it should be different, and what are you trying to present to everybody in Crowhill?
Well, first of all, I look forward to the comparison not being made, because what and this is a mistake on my part, what I didn't want to do is just set up another sample company, and I'll explain that. There have been many, many proud moments working with Spitfire, many happy memories, and many, business successes and big surprises and this, that, and the other. But the thing that stimulated me the most and was the most unexpected was the sheer number and scale of people who were using the instruments and how that had affected people's lives. And I'm not saying like had made massive careers, or possibly did, but how a combination of our lab series, which were free, and then, a pathway into stuff like the Albion thing, which is what we mentioned, was this kind of entry-level orchestral thing. But how a combination of that and our work on YouTube was giving people a sense that they could possibly compose music without having to learn a musical instrument, which, still, particularly with orchestral music, was a preposterous idea back then. And I've always known, if you can't play, teach, and if you can't teach, compose. And have since learned that there are many composers many fine composers who really aren't very good at the piano, who really can't read music, but write wonderful music. If you hum a tune to a little child that's not been hummed before, you're composing. So we started going on. I started doing like these composer walks. Started having much more of a connection with the audience through YouTube and the comments and this, that, and the other. But it was really the lockdown where something really phenomenal happened, and it was coming out of lockdown, having face-to-face meetings with composers, and the number of people whose mental health and to use their words, not mine, survival of lockdown was helped by them losing themselves in making music, hitting a keyboard, and wonderful noises coming out that transports them. And so for me, when I walked away from Spitfire, I wanted to take that experience. And I guess the way I see it, just a little bit like the way I treat art, I love art shops. In fact, I have a bit of a fetish for art and stationery. But, you go to art shops and they're not, every city, every town has art shops, and they're not there because of this preponderance of professional artists earning money out of selling paintings. They're there for people who like painting and drawing and sketching and doing, this, that, and the other. And I would love to be able to become the art shop and a place to hang out and a place to learn for anyone wanting to just experience what it is to make your own music, or as our phrase is, make music your music. I saw an interview with Prince the other day, and it grabbed my attention because I always remembered when Guitar Hero, that computer game, was really popular. I would always look at it with a sense of anxiety of, why would you want to spend so long getting good at something that's really difficult to do instead of just learning a guitar? And there was an interview with Prince saying exactly the same thing. And he said, learning the guitar is frustrating and it's an annoying instrument. It's a difficult instrument to learn. But why would you want to learn how to use this weird interface with a computer game as opposed to making your own music? And there was just this wonderful moment where he kind of paused and he went, because making music, your own music, well, it's heaven. And I thought that was just a really wonderful thing. And, I grew up during an era where, drugs became a really, really big thing. And I lost so many of my friends to drugs. So many of them died. This is the first wave of ecstasy, or Molly, as they call it in the States. And I just think this is a healthier, better escape. But also, I think it's a bit of a grudge match for me with those arseholes who said that I couldn't be a composer simply because I wouldn't write music the way that they wanted me to write it. So for me, it's getting my own back on that and proving them wrong. And I'll just settle on one story that I was so glad that a very good friend of mine and someone I work with bore witness to. We went on a composer walk in Los Angeles, and this guy came up to me, and he was very large, quite an imposing figure. He had long dreadlocks, tattoos. He was a man of color. He was dressed, dare I say it, somewhat maybe stereotypically this term, but the only way I can describe it is he was dressed like a gangbanger, in the sense of LA gangs. And he came up to me and he said, you've changed my life. I saw this dude on YouTube using this thing and making this orchestral music, and I said to myself, I could never do this, but you were giving it away for free. So now when my friends ask me what I do, I tell them I'm an orchestral composer, and it was just utterly profound.
Yeah, that's cool.
For me, it's taking that experience and that relationship on, and we've actually paused Crowhill by and large to reset the emphasis on it being I don't like using the word community because it conjures up kind of carrot cake and people in sandals, but a network or a fellowship, if you will, of musicians just wanting to kind of club together and collaborate and talk about it, and that kind of environment I'm hoping to build is financed by us selling some interesting sounds.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that's really cool to hear about this analogy of like an art gallery almost, because the way that sounds are delivered through Crowhill and presented as new, even exclusive sometimes products, that's a really cool thing that I've picked up on. And that's a good way to put it too, is just like you're actually putting some emphasis on the products themselves. Like even if you don't want to buy it or use it in every song, like take a listen to it and appreciate it and what it is in its existence.
Well, something that I think is very odd about our small corner of the tech industry is that that there are people who write music, there are people who play music, there are people who write lyrics, who do top lines, who do drum beats, this, that, and the other, and a percentage of those people make their own sounds, whether it be buying a synth and twiddling with the knobs or sampling stuff. And it's something that is part of what we do. It's part of what producers do, and it's part of what the Beatles did, and George Martin. Yet the stuff that we buy is made by technologists, and I'm not saying that's bad, but what I'd like Crowhill to be is sounds made by people who make music, because. I think that's really interesting. It's taking people's personalities, and the magic of sampling is, I did this felt piano thing that has been downloaded millions of times, and I hear it on everything, and it's people playing the piano, and I hear my finger. It's on key D4. I can hear my fingernail on it, and
That's funny. Yeah.
There's something romantic about that. Not least, there's a degree of time travel in it as well. I've sampled people who've since passed away, and they're playing and performing on compositions that are written after their passing, which I think is kind of pretty profound, really.
Yeah, it's a very human experience. It's cool.
I think something that is really important to say, just touching on your point. I am a waffler, so do excuse me, but I've never been a fan of computerized music. I know that may sound ridiculous because it is. I've sat in front of a computer making music for the last 25 years, but something that I love is groove and feel and soul and all of that kind of stuff. And I've always rejected being too obedient to the computer, to the grid, to auto-tune and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that we're entering into an age where computerized music and the computerized music a lot of people make and a lot of people have made money out of is under threat, and that's because of AI. And I think that it deserves to be, because it sounds like it could be made by AI. And I think as a consequence, we're about to enter into a golden era where virtuosity and sensibility to performance and humanity comes back to the fore. And that's something that I think we're quite well positioned with Crowhill, is to create stuff that absolutely doesn't sound like it's being created by artificial intelligence, whether it be the sounds or the music.
Yeah, so there's a lot of topics I wanted to actually dive into here, because so AI alone is one of them, but so we actually had a good question too that I want to circle back on in a minute. I don't want to forget.
Sure.
But yeah, I do want to learn more about your workflow, but also now that we're already on AI, you were mentioning that certain products sound or feel like they're from, I think you said technologists, like people that actually invent technologically these things. And that is literally kind of what AI is doing. Even the generative stuff is kind of replicating formulas that it's seen before in different ways. And there could be some unique outcomes in some of that replication, but usually it's not an entirely authentic idea or sound. And so so I wanted to know where you stand generally on what's been happening with AI in this industry. And it's clear, I think, already based on your response that in creating new content, there's no place for that in what you're doing with Crowhill, and you want to actually make sure that stays open for you guys and asserting yourself as like a genuinely unique offering as you release more products, right?
Yeah, it goes right back to that original Chirango story that I told you about of, put the mistakes back in. The samples should sound like they're in the middle of a performance, not like someone tuning up. And where AI is concerned, I think it's a load of bollocks. I don't like it. I don't think people should be exploited. I don't like the idea of my work being scraped for whether it be the sounds that I've made or the music that I've been made. Because we have a system of earning money that's based on the back end.
Yeah.
We don't earn off the front. So if you take away the back, you take away all of the earnings. So I think that's a deep concern. I think culture is, if you damage and destroy cultures, you descend into tyranny. And I think it's a really, really bad idea. There's a reason why the CIA financed the avant-garde movement in West Germany during the Cold War, and that was to sustain culture, because culture for me is the thing that you build the castle around. Without that, there's no need for the castle. where, but I'm not worried about it because I just know that people don't want it. And it's all the way from consumer to maker. And I absolutely guarantee you that composers will be doing whatever they can to convince their listener, their director, their producer, their executive producer that this stuff hasn't been made using AI. The director doesn't want to be accused of using AI to create his or her products by producers or executives or studios. No one along the line is going to go, yeah, it's great, I just did it all on my own with AI. And it's a little bit like, I like having a McDonald's from time to time, but if it's a choice between a home-cooked meal and McDonald's, I'll take the home-cooked meal. We're humans. We respond to things that are impossible to vocalize, talking about music's like dancing about architecture. And there's so many times that I'll hear a piece of music like playing in a pub or something like that, and you'll just go, there will never be an algorithm that would spit this out. And I think it was the other day, it was Papa Was a Rolling Stone, which sits on one note for like 3.5 weeks, only has the chorus appear twice. And it's just like it's befuddling why it's such a huge hit. If it was that easy to come up with a formula to make music that touched people, then Paul McCartney, every single song he's ever written would be that, or Max Martin. They have to write a lot of stuff, and it'll be that thing. There's a great thing I always return to is talk about Paul McCartney. It's Paul McCartney and John Lennon. And he wrote this song called Hey Jules about Julian Lennon, John Lennon's son. And John Lennon said it should be Jules just doesn't work. So he changed it to Hey Jude. Is the algorithm going to pick up that tiny, tiny nuance which takes out 2 letters and creates something that we're singing 60 years later?
That's I didn't know that actually. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Yeah. So I want to go back to this question because I don't want to ignore the questions in the chat, but it's a little bit from before. Someone asked specifically the film music industry. What do you think? It's changing a lot. What do you think the film music industry is in desperate need of in order to change or for the better? And maybe this is now also a good point to talk about it because I'm personally not aware of how badly AI is getting involved in the film music industry. But do you think that there's any certain thing people need to focus on or keep doing to keep the momentum in that industry and make sure things are still authentic and human, I guess?
I don't think that we're going to have to fight for it as composers. If you think directors want to make films without people, you've not met directors.
Right.
It's not what it's about. And people talk about the death of cinema. I'm 53 and I've heard that idea come around about 3 times. There's a cyclicism. Films got really shit in the 1980s, and it's just a little bit like the concert halls were emptied just by not giving people what they wanted. And then you saw, for example, you saw these great independent movies like American Beauty. Those wouldn't be made these days. So what we refer to as like the middle class, the middle tier of movie making, independent movie making, died. And then streaming came online, and that became a really big thing. I will put my money on independent cinema returning. And that is because I think we're all sitting there watching these box sets going, there is no arc. There is an arc within every episode. Maybe there's an arc within the series. But when you're talking about 8 series, what is the arc? It's just a fucking soap opera. That's what it is. And there are people who want to run movie theatres, and there are people who want to go to the cinema. And the exhibitors don't have anything they can play because these things that don't look like they're going to be a hit get passed along to the streamers. But something has changed, and that is digital projectors, which basically means you don't need to make a print. You don't need to invest in that. You can make a film about a local subject and you can show it at local cinemas. You can promote it on your social media, and you can build up a following. And if someone in Japan goes, there's a really big Scottish community out in Kyoto who would be interested in this, can I exhibit that film for a couple of weeks? You can just zap them the file. So I think if anyone was to get into anything, I would say independent cinema is going to make a huge return, and there's a huge demand for it, because there is a I mean, it was just a bit I will shut up, but there was a moment that happened to me recently. I took my kid to see a film in the cinema, and we didn't look at our phones for 2.5 hours, and that was good.
That's a win. That's awesome.
You don't do that at home.
Sometimes you can't even do that in the cinema. You still check your phone. Yeah.
You,
no, I know, but
fair,
of course.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's a great form of escape that you don't, we can't get away from just being pummeled by. I mean, I don't want to sound like an old grumpy sod, but it's just, it's just not as good at home as it is in the cinema, because you don't concentrate. And if you were to put on the kind of films that I love watching, which is kind of thrillers from the 1970s, the way that people watch television, you wouldn't understand what on earth is going on, because you're not paying attention. But you do when you go to the cinema. And look at the theatre. The West End in London is having its biggest epoch in history, and that flies in the face of screens and streaming.
Yeah. That's a valid, it's a powerful place to go watch something, and it does definitely engage you way more. The sound system is way more impressive than anything you have at home. That's my favorite part, is actually being able to enjoy the music of the music, like the mix down even of the movie I'm watching. And
just not being bothered, just not being disturbed. You can't get away from this stuff, and I can see it. I can see people getting rid of their smartphones. We're moving away from that, and I think film is an art form that will remain, just like opera has, just like theatre has, just like poetry has. It's another part of the canon, and there'll always be crime documentaries on Netflix, but there's a reason why Netflix is going into sports, because they realise that people like that sense of togetherness, because we're descended from apes.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. So I just wanted to interject again real quick to the chat. We're probably going to go a couple more minutes, but yeah, I just wanted to remind the chat that we are doing a giveaway. We're giving away the new Crowhill product, VENOM, in collaboration or in conjunction with the UJAM Blockbuster bundle, and all you have to do is be active in the chat. A lot of you are active in the chat. I've been looking through it, and if I'm missing questions, I'm very sorry, but I'm in a very engaging conversation. But feel free to ask questions, and I will try to bring them up to Christian. And then at the end, we'll do a random raffle to see who will win. And I think it's more than one. I think it's a couple of people. Simon can remind me. Might be two. But anyway, so I also wanted to, I know a lot of people watching, Christian, are probably also very interested in your workflow musically. We talked about, I was reading your interview about how you like to, and even now it's coming up again, I'm noticing the same themes in you that you're really passionate about, just distancing yourself from technology and the noise, even within the DAW, setting limits for yourself. I think I read that you do sessions in 3 or 4 hours a day, and then that's it. You kind of step away and you only do administrative stuff, or not even, you go outside and enjoy life. So I think a lot of people would probably be interested in your workflow, because that's something that I think most musicians probably struggle with digitally, is being home, being remote, always having all the tools and being like, why can't I finish or be inspired? What are some recent learnings, or what are your favorite tricks to do for people that might be working on compositions, whether it's like a pop production or a film score? What have you found good success with in your workflow?
Something that has been a constant from the get-go is there is no greater joy as a composer to have musicians play your music, whether they be great musicians or just vibey musicians. And I just don't see there any excuse not to use live musicians. And by golly, they make our job so much easier. So that's a constant throughout my career. I've always used live musicians, and will completely spunk away all of everything I'm being paid as my commission to work with as many musicians as humanly possible. Something that has entered into my awareness has been, some struggles that I've had with mental health, addiction. And I've been analyzing this weird thing that the computer has done, which is it's isolated us. And as I mentioned before, we're descended from apes, and if you isolate as an ape, you die. So our brains don't like it. We also think that a measure of our success is the number of hours we work a day. If you look on any study, the most productivity you can get out of a day at a stretch is 3.5 hours. So I decided as an experiment to try taking my working day from 18 hours to 4 a day, with a break in the middle. And I'm being more productive, and the music I'm making is much better than anything I've ever done. And that is because my humanity is not completely diminished. There's a thing that I'm going to be making a poster out of this, but there's a very, very simple thing that I think people should follow. And it's a word called HALT. It's an acronym rather, called HALT, which is hungry, angry, lonely, tired. All of these things put you in a really, really bad mindset. And all of these things are what we do when we're doing 18-hour days and getting notes from people who don't respect the amount of work we're putting in. So I would just urge people to try not sitting behind a computer, because let's all face it, are we really, really doing stuff, or are we actually looking at kind of car crashes and Russian drunks having fights on the internet? But also, let's remember that these things are designed, they're basically a calculator and typewriter that's been kind of developed. They at the heart of them, it isn't a musical device. They kind of make quite good tape recorders, and I think that's how you should treat them.
Yeah. I would like you to make a poster of the HALT acronym, because you mentioned that, and I'm also remembering the merch store, the Crowhill merch store. I thought was always really cool. So if this is my opinion, put that on something there, and I'll grab one. But anyway, yeah, I like that mantra, and I think that it's super helpful for creatives to just remember to create space for yourself, because everything productive and meaningful coming at you has to come from somewhere meaningful. And it's not going to come from just your computer. Yeah.
If you're feeling depressed, that's quite a complex thing to overcome. But if you're feeling any of those things within HALT, the answer's very, very simple. If you're hungry, eat. If you're angry, get out of what you're doing and go for a walk. If you're lonely, pick up the telephone. And if you're tired, go to fucking bed.
Yeah. That's awesome. I like that tip. I want to remember that for myself. So I haven't seen many more questions directly, but I did want to also loop the thread a little bit here and mention, I wanted to ask you about your collaboration with us, with UJAM. And I actually don't know if I personally know the story of how it came to be, and the mutual connections. I know we have mutual or similar work or association with Hans Zimmer. So I would also just be curious to hear that story from your mouth, because I don't always know all the lore, even from UJAM. So I would love to know how it came to be, this relationship, how it flourished, and what you hope comes out of it over time too.
Sampling is really, really boring, and it's easy to do. It's a little bit like, I don't know, chess or backgammon. It's easy to learn, difficult to master. And so not many people get as obsessed with it as I have. And I just recently, I've done a YouTube video that's going up with all sounds made from just shit sounds made from things like Nespresso machines and stuff, recorded on an iPhone. And I turned that into like this drill track. I'm totally obsessed with sampling. And so is a gentleman called Hans Zimmer. And they say you will never get a response from emailing Hans Zimmer unless it's about sampling. And just over the years, we've built up this relationship. about making sounds. I think one of the funniest things that I've done with him was when he kind of caught wind of the fact that I'd moved to Scotland, and he said, "Christian, I'm writing a score for bagpipes. Can you help me book the musicians?" And it turned out to be the score for Dune.
Sweet.
So we've had this working relationship, and he is a really dear friend who is also incredibly supportive and insanely loyal to people who show that loyalty back. So when I decided to set up this business, he said, "I must introduce you to my friends at UJAM," because we were looking for an engine for our samples. We didn't want it to be on Contact. I find Contact to be a blocker for quite a lot of people. And again, for me, it's all about inclusivity and opening the door, letting people cross the threshold and have a go. And UJAM has understood and saw that immediately. And so something that we are also working on, which won't be as obvious for everyone, is accessibility. And we're talking to a lot of people who are sight impaired, and just trying to make what we do as accessible as humanly possible. It's been a great relationship with Hans, and every time he calls, I pinch myself because, it's a very recognizable name that looks really cool as well. So that's how we met you guys. And it's something that I think that over the forthcoming years, it become clearer that the companies are growing closer together in brotherhood and or sisterhood. It's there's a like-mindedness to what we do. But also, I'm really pleased to say that I work with an incredibly talented group of people, the best of the best. And I think that UJAM is really enjoying how much they put UJAM through their paces. Just going, "Wouldn't it be good if?" And they go, "Oh God, that's another sprint." But I think that this is what happens with, coming out of isolation and working with people is collaborations enable you to achieve something you couldn't achieve alone, and that's what this is with UJAM.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the same way as like a musical collaboration. Even it's the same thing. You're creating something new, and you're fusing influences and visions, and it's just even better when visions are similar. And I really like all of the stuff you said about Crowhill and the positioning of what you want out of it and what you want to say with it. And I never knew that, and it does sound very familiar to like how we do UJAM, and we keep it independently owned, and we just like there's a important thing we want to do for musicians, and I really like that that's so similar with you and with Crowhill. So yeah,
and I run Crowhill with my wife. And
oh really? I didn't know that.
We my wife is an artist called Dot Allison, and we see it as a family business, and through that door there is my kids and stuff, and if they don't do too well at school, they'll still get fed provided they come and work in this room.
That's cool. That's awesome. You got the legacy all set up and ready to go. I just got notice that we did spin the wheel for the giveaway for those who are in the chat. The winners from the chat of the new Crowhill VENOM product and the UJAM Blockbuster bundle, which contains virtual guitarist Cinedream, virtual pianist Score, symphonic element strings, beatmaker Nemesis, U-Synth Stranger and Caramel, and finisher Neo and Boost. It's a lot of stuff you're getting for free. So the two winners of that are Les Fuller, Les space Fuller. I don't know if I said it right, but that's the spelling. And then Steph, Steph. I'm surprised that's not like a username. I don't know if there's more than one Steph in here. Hopefully not. But Steph won. Congratulations to Les Fuller and Steph. You guys won Crowhill VENOM and the UJAM Blockbuster bundle just from being active. But yeah, I think that was a pretty comprehensive overview, and I loved chatting with you. I learned a lot about your background, your story, and more importantly, your what's the word I'm looking for? Spirit, in terms of how you handle all of your work, and the vision is present in a lot of the things you do and say. So this has been really cool for me, and I will give another chance for any last minute questions for you. or the floor again to you, Christian, for anything that you wanted to circle back on or double tap that we might have not looked at too closely. But
I just, there's something that, I'll circle back on that Holt thing. I have this YouTube channel, and for the first few years, I did a lot of my kind of talking about technology from the side of a hill close to where I live, and people couldn't work out why I did that. And it was just to encourage people to get out. And music and composition is a form of human expression, and if you deny yourself life, if you deny yourself your humanity, then I think that your compositions will suffer, and that includes by relying too heavily on technology. And by thinking that sitting in front of a typewriter is the best place to express yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. With that, I might call it a stream. I hope everybody enjoyed watching and learned something, and maybe got inspired to, adopt some of this mentality into your workflow, to create space for yourself, to follow the HALT protocol. And to keep an eye out for incoming HALT merch, just a reminder. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in. I'm Adam from UJAM. This has been a really great conversation with Christian Henson of Crowhill and various other things. But yeah, I had a really good time. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. Congrats again to the winners, and hopefully you tune in again next time and we do something like this again. But
thanks so much.
All right, everybody. Have a good one, and until next time, thank you so much.